And sorry about the cancellation of the previous event. You can hear that, can't you?
Yeah.
So, you've got a microphone as well. You're going to turn that on.
I have, yes. Is it turned on? Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry
she's
about
turned it on.
cancelling the other event, but I had COVID and I didn't think anybody else would want it. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and congratulations, Moth has just walked the London Marathon, which is good. Just the Salt Path, how many languages are out in now?
23 now.
And it's
23.
sold 1 million or two, I imagine.
Quite a lot.
Yeah. What do you put it down to?
I put it down to, I think actually, it was a very personal story, but at the same time it's the sort of story that we all share, because we all have those moments when life falls apart, everything goes wrong, we're just looking for the way forward. So I think we all share that, share that moment in life when things don't go to plan.
I asked my daughter today, who loves it, on the phone, and she said, well, it's just brazen and organic, which I thought was kind of
So,
you could have that for the jacket. And the inspiration, can you mention that Mark Wallington book, 500 Mile Walkies?
It was, yes, 500 Mile Walkies, yeah.
What was it about that? It's humorous, like you've got great humour in yours as well.
I think it was just that moment when I spotted it, that moment as we were just about to leave the door for the last time. And I just saw that book in the packing case, and just the idea of walking, and just walking with a rucksack on your back and containing everything you needed, and just in that awful moment, the idea of just filling a rucksack and going for a walk just seemed like the most obvious thing to do.
I looked him up, apparently he wrote some Dave Allen sketches, you probably knew that, did you?
Yeah, he did apparently. Yeah. I've
70.
never spoken to him personally, but...
And what other travel writing? Because yours is not like, say, Patrick Leigh Fermor, who doesn't talk about going for a shit in the hedge and getting caught out.
No, but I think, if you're going to describe a journey, then you need to include all the elements of it.
Yeah.
Or you don't get a real feel for it, do you?
Yeah. But there is a lot of new travel writing by women that's a bit more personal involved, isn't there?
A bit more earthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, a bit more real, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Copsford is a book you wrote an introduction for, though. Can you tell us a bit about that before we move on?
Yeah, Copsford. It's a strange little story. It's one that I read a long time ago, and then out of the blue, the publishers of it asked me to write a foreword for it, and so I had to reread it, and there was so much of that story that I really related to. It was from just post-war, and really the story of somebody just going to a derelict cottage in the countryside and refinding his way in life through connecting to the natural world. And there was just something about that I felt a real connection to, so I was quite happy to write that forward.
Do you think your book makes people really appreciate their home and the potential of maybe not having one as well?
Possibly so. Possibly, if it gives you the slight feeling of, how would I feel if that happened to me? Then maybe it does make you appreciate home a bit more.
You talk about the homeless in an amazing way as well. It makes me think of that bit in King Lear where King Lear feels homeless and he says kings should all take physic and know what it's like. But why are people afraid? People were afraid of you sometimes when you look like tramps, weren't they? Why do you think that is?
I think we carry an awful lot of preconceptions about what homelessness is, and about why someone is homeless and how they come to that point. I think there's a sort of generalisation that it's either some form of substance abuse or a mental health issue that brings people to homelessness. And that is the case. That is an element of the number of people who are homeless. It is a percentage of them. But then behind that are hundreds of thousands of people who are homeless that we never see or we never even hear of. because the numbers that we're given for homelessness are so disconnected from the truth that we can't possibly understand the size of the problem, really.
But you met and spoke to a lot of people on the journey, including homeless people, didn't you?
Yes,
Did you?
we did.
And did you come away sort of, because you've got amazing acts of kindness, but sometimes quite the reverse. How would you talk about, your experience of rural Britain overall? More kindness?
Yes, I think it was a surprise to find how much homelessness there was in rural Britain.
Even in some pretty places.
Yes, because we don't see it, because it's hidden from view, especially in the southwest. It's sort of tidied off the streets and put in a less visible area. And rural Britain, I think we're in a state of, well, it's in crisis, to be honest, if we're going to be honest about it, and it's a second home crisis, because there's a huge amount of homelessness and inability to buy homes for the young people within the countryside. And yet, take Cornwall for example, in the winter, 2/3 of all the villages are dark, the lights aren't on, and that's a problem.
Because you still live there, don't you?
I do, yeah.
Although along from Polruan and
Yes,
Sam's
I do.
Farm.
Yeah.
So you know what you're talking about. While we're on the difficult subjects then, I was going to ask you about the ban on wild camping, and feel free to just reply with a 4-letter word and move on. What do you think about that?
I think it's a real shame, actually. There are actually, it's only Dartmoor in England where it has been legal to actually wild camp. And now, following a ruling in the High Court, one of the major landowners on Dartmoor has had that reversed. That what we believed was a legal right, he's had it overturned, which has set a precedent for every other landowner on Dartmoor to have it overturned as well. And people say, why does it matter? Why should people go out and wild camp in the countryside? Because they just leave a mess. But actually the majority of people who wild camp don't leave a scrap. You wouldn't even know they'd been there. We recently, before Landlines, walked through Scotland. We walked the length of Scotland, and Scotland has the Right to Roam Act, which within that allows people to wild camp. Actually, there's some wording in that act that says that they have the right to wild camp and to pass across a piece of land in order to further their cultural and natural heritage, their understanding of it. What do we do to further our understanding of our natural heritage? And how do we teach our young people to connect to the natural world if we bring in more and more and more legislation that shuts them away from it? How do we do that?
Yeah.
I personally think the right to wild camp in our national parks should be extended beyond Dartmoor, personally, because obviously I don't actually believe in the full-on right to roam, because coming from a farming background, I understand both sides of the argument.
Yeah.
But in our national parks, in the high wild places, it's a different matter.
Meanwhile, it has to be a secret activity, which is what you do a lot of, don't you? Or have had to do a lot of, edges of golf courses. So on Landlines, for those of you who don't know, after the Wide Silence came this fantastic book. Cape Wrath is bonkers. I looked at the guidebook. A lot of it's unmarked, isn't it, the Cape Wrath Trail?
Yes. Yeah. There aren't any signposts.
So a lot of these ideas seem to quietly come from Moth, who's got almost the most suffering to face. Is that a fair impression sometimes?
I think this time, sort of the idea grew through the final lockdown of sort of 20 into 21, and Moth hadn't been walking anywhere near enough during all those lockdowns. He'd just been going round and round the block, but just not the miles that he needs to do. And his health was really deteriorating really so quickly that he was beginning to believe that he was approaching the end stages of this illness, and there was nothing he could do, and he was sort of starting to accept that, but I just didn't feel I could. I just didn't feel I could just accept that this was the stage we'd got to without trying just one more time. And then I came across this little guidebook. It was one that we'd never used, a tiny, thin little guidebook to the Cape Wrath Trail, and it was a part of Scotland that we'd visited when we were in our 20s, but never had time to spend time to really explore it. And I sort of thought, if there was anywhere that was going to really make him want to give it one more try, it would be there. So I put it on the worktop, and put it on the table, and I left it in the bathroom until the day came when he came into the kitchen and slapped it on the worktop and said, "Going to Scotland, are we?"
God. I did, when you mentioned that your mother was the first woman in the village to wear trousers, I wondered whether she was part of for all her difficulties with moth, whether she was part of that spirit of yours.
Possibly so. Maybe, if you've read Wild Silence, I didn't have an easy relationship with my mum, but there was something very independent about her. She lived very independently until she was 90. Like I say in the book, she was the first woman in the village to wear trousers and was absolutely reviled for it. But that was the way she was, really. She really didn't much care about what other people said.
So why didn't she like moth? Did she think he was like swampy or something?
No.
Or was he like swampy?
Slightly. Well, she came from generations of farmers, as did my dad, and that was their world. Farming's a very closed world. It's a world where people know other farmers and they interact with other farmers. Moth came into the house in these long bonkers boots and a big old ex-RAF coat flying in the wind with his hair down here, and they were utterly horrified. Also, of course, obviously, he had no acres. It sounds like nothing, but it was a real issue.
But once you get out there, he seems to get better a lot of the time, doesn't he?
Goodness, yeah.
Sometimes. Extraordinary, but after some hairy moments. And you talk about trail magic. Can you talk a bit more about it? Because I love that section.
Trail magic. It's trail magic's the idea that when you're on the trail, if you need something or you really want something, somehow it will come to you, somewhere or another, or you'll just be overwhelmed with awe and wonder, and it won't matter that you needed or thought you needed this thing. We were in a really remote part of Knoydart in Scotland, Barrisdale Bay. It's this absolutely stunningly beautiful bay, sort of surrounded by really dark mountains. They've got like veins of quartz in them, and this incredible arc of beach that's sort of broken oyster shells and quartz, and stunning in the sun. As the sun catches the sea there, it's just like the whole thing's like crystal. It's beautiful. But you can't get there by road. You can only walk or come in by boat, and it's sort of like 6 miles to it to get in. And we were there anyway, and we just put up our tent on this absolutely midge-infested campsite. And 3 people just came and appeared around our tent and sat down and started talking. And they were walking Land's End to John O'Groats, and were almost finished because they were almost in the north. And they were talking about their trail and trail magic, and how things had happened to them along the way, that had given them what they needed when they needed it. And anyway, we talked into the night with them, and we'd run out of food. At that point, we'd just spent too long. Spent too long looking at the view, spent too long swimming in the river, and had used all our food supplies in this long stretch between anywhere where we could buy it. And so we were going to have to divert 10 miles in the opposite direction to get some food. And It was 4 in the morning, and I was asleep in the tent, and I just heard this rustling. And I looked up, and this hand came under the side of the tent. Well, at 4 o'clock in like the wilds of nowhere, the hand's coming under your tent. It's like, but this hand came under the tent, and it put a packet of Haribos and a Mars bar in a boot. It's trail magic. Because packet of Haribos got us the next 10 miles to the shop, so perfect.
And it's quite hard to camp though. What is Knock and Lochen, in case people all go off that sort of rough ground?
In the very, very far northwest of Scotland, you're in Sutherland, and it's if you've not been, it's a landscape like no other. It feels closer to Iceland than it does to the landscape of the rest of the UK somehow. It's like
the least visited Ordnance Survey map, famously.
very, yeah.
Least purchased.
World apart. And there's this huge areas of the landscape are known as Knock and Lochen. And if you try to walk across them, it's hideous. Because you're sort of going through bogland where the knocks are like little raised bits of rock, and the Lochens are tiny like locks on the opposite side of them. But you're constantly, and in between that is sort of bogland. So yeah, it's not the easiest thing to walk across, and it's not good for your feet, I'd say.
Do you think you're fitter than you were when you were 50? You've done so much walking, when you started Saltpath?
Fitter than I was when we got to Cape Wrath, that's for sure.
But still loads of blisters are quite a theme in the book. Have you got any tips for avoiding blisters? You must be a bit of an expert now.
I can tell you a story about
Yeah.
blisters. Yeah, if you've read Landlines, the blisters are like, I'm sorry if it put you off your dinner, it's quite grim. We had this, I'll start at the beginning, don't watch YouTube videos if you're planning a trip, because they just completely distort your thinking. We watched these series of YouTube videos about this man that did the Cape Wrath Trail with his dog, and he was going south to north, whereas we were going to go north to south. And each episode of these YouTube videos, the bogs got deeper and deeper, so they were above his knees, and then he was wading through nearly waist deep through these bogs with his dog round his shoulders. I was thinking, oh my God, I'm going to need like industrial boots that keep the water out, or I'll get blisters because my feet will be wet. So Moth found these ex-army boots, which he thought were like paradise on his feet. They were wonderful. I was like, oh, okay, and I wore them quite a bit, and it seemed okay, and I thought it was going to be okay. But the first day into the walk, with the weight on my back, it was a whole other picture, and the skin just started to shred off my feet, until a few days in, I'd used 4 packets of Compeed, and I was wearing these like blister plaster booties. And then when I finally took them off, it like took the whole layer of skin off with it. So it was not a good time. But you'd think after that I would know how to buy a pair of shoes, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Then we did a London Marathon 2 weeks ago, and I've got this pair of running shoes that I've been wearing, and I thought, these are going to be fine, my feet are going to be good, it's all going to be okay. 10 miles in, I was stopping to put the blister plasters on. By the time we got to the end, I couldn't stop, because the second I stopped, my feet were like balls of burning pain. And now, finally, 2 weeks later, my feet are just starting to dry up, and like my toes have just like shredded whole booties of skin. And like yesterday, I was thinking, oh, I've got a stone in my sock. I took my shoe off, and it's my toenail. So either I've got extraordinarily delicate feet, or somebody needs to advise me on shoes.
Bad luck. Do you get into all the kicks? That's another thing. My wife's an ultra runner, and she goes down wormholes on YouTube of kit, and you met those people who just had some grains and they just soak it every night in cold water. They were really hardcore. You weren't jealous of them, were you, with that stuff?
When you've been walking all day carrying a rucksack, do you want to eat a bowl full of cold grains? No.
Cool.
No. But yeah, lots of people who really do serious long distances and go for walks that are all about the distance. They do live on those diets of bags of grain that they soak in cold water, and then the next day they just eat cold mush all day. Not for me, but there you go.
There was a bit of a theme in there of sort of great coincidences. I think you believe in the power of coincidence and things, don't you? A bit.
Well, I think so. I think to be honest, sorry, just trying to move my hair off the mic.
It's you can't really argue with it. Some of the things that happened to you, not just the tortoise anecdote, but there's something going on there.
Yeah, with that tortoise, there certainly wasn't there?
Yeah.
Strange. Yeah, I mean, those books go littered with coincidences. They do seem to.
Maybe more once you've sort of left home and trust yourself to nature or something.
Maybe so. Maybe you start to see a little bit of serendipity here and there. Maybe you do.
Do you remember the army bloke who you were a bit wary of at first? He was a great character.
Oh yeah,
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, we came to our stove had broken in the middle of nowhere where we couldn't replace it, and if you've read my books, you know I do drink quite a lot of tea, and just the thought of carrying on the walk without any tea, it was almost like I went into a meltdown. It just wasn't possible. So we managed to order a new stove and have it sent to a pub that was like 3 days away, because we couldn't stay on a campsite because it was bank holiday and all the pitches were booked. It was, anyway, some endless story. So we came 3 days later with no tea. We came to this pub and it was absolutely just in nowhere. And we were greeted by this group of people who were drinking out the back, and we said, "Is the pub open?" They said, "No." All right, okay. And they said, "No, because we're here." And it went on like that. Anyway, that turned out to be the owner, who was just had a 24-hour party the day before and didn't want to open the pub. And he was this incredible character with a very shiny head and a kilt and a very larger-than-life character.
And a bit drunk, I think you said.
He was 24 hours drunk. Actually, he said he was just sober now and ready for the evening's party, but yeah, it turned into a whole day of just sitting and eating and drinking with these people, who turned out to be the kindest, the most generous people you could possibly meet. And just as we were about to leave, shoved some bottles of beer and a load of sandwiches and things in our bag and said, "They're for the big man, because I know courage when I see it." Yeah. And it was just a really moving moment of never ever prejudge people just by your first impression, because they can be so different to what you think.
He sensed what you were doing, didn't he, on a long journey?
Yes, I
He
think so.
said that wonderful thing about, "I've seen that in the army, you're getting back to base." I think that's a great.
Yeah, he did. He turned out to be somebody who'd spent some time in the army, and he was saying, "I've seen that look, like you said, I've seen that look before in soldiers who just want to get back to the base." And yeah, he was a remarkable man, really.
Do you want your book in nature writing or autobiography or travel? Tedious bookseller questions, because it can go in so many. All of them.
All over the shop.
Yeah, that's what I tend to do. Waterstones have a system of which section is it in. It shouldn't be classified, but as nature writing, they're great. I mean, I've only seen a golden plover, I think, once when I was young, but that's a bit of a figure in Landlines, isn't it? It's fantastic.
Yes, we kept hearing this bird, and I knew the sound of this bird at night and in the day, but we had no idea what it was that was making the noise, and we just kept hearing it all the time, over and over and over again, until someone said it's a golden plover, and we were like, "Oh, of course it is." But I don't know, would you call Landlines nature writing? I mean, I write about nature, but there are
Both sections.
possibly not what you would classically term nature writing, because I write about nature through human experience, and people have criticised that. They've said, well, it's not nature writing at all, because you're writing about it from the human experience rather than an academic study of things. People have said, I know nothing whatsoever about British nature. You know, people have been interesting in their comments.
Yeah, I bet. Oh, tell us about the person you met in France you were telling me about.
Person I met in France.
Who'd had an essay, a chapter on your book.
Oh, right.
Because somebody here might know what the word was, I didn't know.
Oh, yeah, that word.
There's bound to be some
Yeah, I went to
structuralists here.
France for the publication of the Salt Path in French, and the translator of the book was there, and he showed me a book, and I'm so annoyed I can't think what it was called. He showed me a book, and it was an academic work on grammar, and it was about poetry within the grammar of the structural creation of a piece of written work. And he'd written an entire chapter on the Salt Path. And I cannot for the life of me remember what the word is for this
Thing.
So we were hoping there was someone here who might know what the word was, but obviously not.
Have you always wanted to write?
I really wanted to write when I was a child. I always wrote stories when I was a child. I loved it. I can remember writing a piece when I was in secondary school, writing a piece for an English essay, and the teacher sending me to the school psychiatrist because she thought I needed therapy. But really, it was just a really descriptive piece.
Yeah.
They shouldn't. Teachers shouldn't give you a picture and say, tell me what you think, and turn it into an essay if they don't want to hear.
Exactly. Did you have a go at getting published a lot before the disasters hit and you were 50 and started doing something?
I left school, I never wrote another thing. Well, not in a literary way at all. And never even thought about writing.
And does it come easily? I mean, a lot of people have commented on how good the prose is and the evocation. Does it come easy? Do you have to go and be alone, or are you a cafe writer or something?
I need to be alone. I need it to be quiet, because I've found that when I'm writing, it becomes a little bit like walking. I think the further into it I get, the more it starts to feel like a meditation. And when I'm writing, I think I almost write myself into the place, and I inhabit the place, and then I try to create that place because I'm in it. So it does need to be quiet. I think that's the only thing. Otherwise, anywhere. But don't talk to me.
No. And do you sometimes meditate? You mention it sometimes.
I tried. We used to go to a meditation group when we lived in Polruan at the end of the beginning of the Wild Silence. And everyone took it very, very seriously. But then Moth would start snoring. Yeah, no, I was never too good at it, really. I've got to say, I was never too good at it. I always ended up just gazing out the window while everyone else was in the zone.
Do you think there was a comfort book, I always ask this, when you were young, that really you hung on to and repeatedly read, that meant loads to you?
Yeah, I mean, I had a few when I was really, really young. I had this big picture book called Caroline and Her Friends, and it was about this little girl and a group of animals that went on a tour of the world, and they went to Italy and India and all these places. And it was a beautiful little book. I loved that. But then somebody gave me a copy of Tarka the Otter, and I absolutely loved that book. I think I just loved the way you were like down there in the water with the otter, and you weren't observing the otter from elsewhere. You were in the water with it. And I think maybe when people say, do you have some influence in the way you write, maybe it's something of that childhood of rereading Tarka the Otter about 50 times.
Literally.
Maybe subconsciously it's in there somewhere.
Fantastic. I don't know about Sailor the Salmon. Did you read that? The other
No,
one by him? No,
I've seen that one.
was a sleeper. I just will throw it open, but basically, I love that passage. You say most people never find out what's within them, the big stuff.
Yeah.
What are you still discovering?
Still discovering. It's been a real strange period of discovery over the last year or so, actually. I was approached by a folk band called Gig Span, a big band, to create a collaboration, a words and music collaboration that would sort of like create a picture of the Southwest. They collected a beautiful collection of songs and music from the Southwest, historical pieces of traditional music, and I've written words that are my experience of the Southwest, what the Southwest, evokes in me, and we've woven it together as a show really of words and music, where the words seem to grow out of the music, and the music feeds out of the words, and it's become an absolute joy to do. And from being so terrified about having to come and speak at events, that in the early stages of the books being published, I was literally locked in the toilet. You'd have to wait because I'd still be up there. To be on the stage with this folk band that they're made up of Peter Knight, who used to be in Steel Eye Span, who's like your real like traditional but classical influence player, and John Spires from Bellowhead, and some really top of their genre musicians, and it's been an absolute joy to.
And you're doing this at the Gulbenkian in Canterbury in the summer?
Yes, in July. I think it's the 23rd, but don't quote me on that. But it is at that thing.
And Raina's got some of the CDs here, which she's selling herself, aren't you?
I've got a few, yes.
With a bit of like your
Just
card
like
machine
a
at
little
work.
taster, and then you might want to come and see it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Are there any questions? I'm sure there are questions from you good people about anything after the traditional silence. Yeah.
When you're on these walks, are you making notes with the idea that you're going to write a book when you're finished?
Do I make notes? I didn't make any notes for the Salt Path. Moth made a few little penciled notes in the margins of the guidebook, little notes about where we camped or maybe people we'd met, and that's what I drew from when I wrote the book. But when we went to Cape Wrath and we started walking through Scotland, I did actually start to keep notes. A few weeks in, I started to keep notes because we were having such unusual conversations with people. It was at such a strange time.
I just think you couldn't possibly have just remembered that,
But the Salt Path, I had the guidebook. I had Paddy Dillon's little guidebook, and his great descriptions, and through that the OS map, and then Moth's notes. And when I put them together, put those three together, it was almost as if I was back on the path, and I could picture that next corner, what came around that corner. And like I was saying earlier, when I start to write, it's sort of like I put myself into it and re-inhabit it somehow.
But did you know when you started that walk it was going to produce
Goodness
a book?
no, it wasn't further from our minds.
Landlines, presumably.
We weren't intending it to be a book because it was just a walk for us. We were just going to walk the Cape Wrath Trail. We had no intention of going any further than that, and it was just a thing we were doing for Moth's health, with our fingers crossed really, and I had no intention of that being anything more. But then as it spread beyond the Cape Wrath Trail and into the West Highland Way and then the Pennine Way, and it kept going until we got all the way back to Cornwall, I knew by the time we got to the end of West Highland Way, I think I knew that it was something remarkable, and I needed to write about it.
Anyone else? Yes, Lady in Blue.
How easy or difficult do you find it to settle back into normal life when you've been on your walks?
When we finished the Salt the South West Coast Path, and we moved into the village. We were so lucky to get that little apartment at the back of the chapel. So lucky that somebody was generous enough to offer that. And I thought I would slip back into what we call normal, and it would be so easy and life would go on. But I just couldn't settle. I couldn't sleep. I felt agitated all the time. I'd be awake at night and walk out onto the coast path, and then I put the tent up in the bedroom. I literally slept in a tent for weeks, and I just knew then that actually it was because I was feeling disconnected from that wild sense of open space and freedom and connection to the land that we'd had when we were walking. And I think I still feel that every time we come back from a long walk. It's still that same awkward, jagged, jarring time of transition when we come back from a walk. I don't put the tent up now in the house, but I think now, maybe after each walk, you still carry something of that walk with you. You're still, part of you is still out there. So it's never easy at all.
Anyone else? Yes.
Hi.
Stripy lady.
I've written it down. I was wondering if you think that your books have motivated a wider audience to get involved in conservation, and has this led to concrete changes?
For those who might not have heard at the back, have the books inspired people to get a wider interest in conservation? And I'm glad we brought that climate crisis up.
I really hope so, because it is a much bigger issue than most of us give it credence for. As we walk down the country, as I've described in Landlines, if you get a chance to read it, I was really surprised to find that climate change is very, very real and definitely happening. As we walk through the Pennines across that incredible huge blanket bog, it was drying and blowing like dust in the wind, and there were miles, days of no water whatsoever in a place that should be just teeming with water. And to the point where we went through 2 days of every 100, 200 metres there were dead sheep, dead rabbits, because of lack of water. There are lots of things happening in the climate, lots of things that I've seen, observed, that I've documented in that book. But water, I'm coming to believe, is going to be one of our biggest problems. I really believe so. I think we've got to find a way, and not at some point in the future, but soon, to start to find a way to capture all this amazing bounty that falls out of the sky, because we're going to be in trouble, I think, if we don't.
Is Moth optimistic? He's a good person for quoting Rumi, isn't he, on this subject? You think he's optimistic?
I'd like to say he was, but I think we did observe places where actually work is being done, and the cycle of climate environmental reduction is being reversed. Yeah, we came to the Tees Valley on the Pennines, and suddenly the air was full of lapwings. Now, I don't know about here in the east, but over much of the country, the lapwings are in serious decline. And where you used to see flocks of them, where when I was a child, you'd walk through the fields and you'd see the little stripy chicks. You never see that anymore. And you hardly ever see one where we are. But there, the sky was full of them, and we were like, why? Why here? But as we turned into the main Tees Valley, the riverbanks were an absolute mass of wildflowers of every type. And the farmers were cutting the grass at the time. But they were cutting the meadows, but leaving the large patches of wildflowers. They weren't cutting them down, they were leaving them. And the air was full of insect life. And I think we can do it. We can turn this round, but we need to act. And that's the problem. We need to stop talking and actually act, because we've already got the resources. We already know what we need to do. We already know how to change things, but we're not doing it.
Yeah. I think Isabella Tree gave a great quote on your book, and she's certainly someone who's acting and showing what can be done, isn't she,
Yes.
with the rewilding book.
Yes, she is.
Is there anyone else? How about the man in glasses? Sorry.
There's been kind of interest in recent cinema with these kind of like pilgrimage movies in the UK, like The Last Bus with Timothy Spall and the recent Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry. So I guess my question is, they are kind of stories about these kind of semi-eccentric undertakings, ambitious undertakings that have, they're pilgrimage, they have a sense of healing and transformation. What would you think, or how would you approach it if someone approached you to option the book and turn it into, fictionalise it, and who could you envisage playing yourself and Mom?
Oh, yeah.
Well, actually, I can give you an absolute exclusive here. I've never said this to an event before, but it's been announced today, so I can do. It has been optioned. It's been optioned for the last 3 years, but finally we've got to the point of it's going to start filming on the 5th of June. So there will be a film. It's being filmed in Cornwall, so it'll all be there on the coast. And today they've announced the actors. So right up until now, people have always said, who do you want to play you? And I've said, oh, Meryl Streep, and we'll make it a musical. but actually, I can tell you who it is now. So it's Gillian Anderson. Now, not like when I told Moth who it was going to be, and he said, Pamela Anderson, are you sure? And Jason Isaacs. And they both came round for the day. How weird is that?
Oh my God.
They came to the house for the day. And Pamela Anderson.
Gillian.
Gillian
Anderson. I had to give her a lesson in how to put a sleeping bag back into its case. If you've read Landlines, you know Moth's not good at this. Broke his finger doing it. I think that's something I will hold in my memory for a lifetime, is Gillian Anderson trying to put a sleeping bag back in its case. So whether, I somehow don't think that'll make it into the film.
What channel will it be, or platform?
I've no idea. I've no idea at the moment.
Will it be a feature film or?
Yeah,
Yes, feature film.
feature film.
Oh,
Yeah.
congratulations.
At the cinema.
Yeah.
I wonder if that judge will go and see it.
Sorry?
I wonder if that judge will go and see it.
That'd be interesting, wouldn't it?
Let's see at the premiere. A few more questions. Yeah, that lady's been waiting.
In a minute.
Have you got plans to do any other walks? Because I don't know how long does it take after you get back for Moth to feel the effects of not walking?
We have got a few walks planned now, because we know we're moving towards the time when we need to. We've realised we can't leave it too long. But strangely, you know, a really long walk, hundreds of miles of walking, does seem to hold the effect for about a year, which is incredible. But now he's in the point where, luckily, we've been sort of trying to do a little bit of training for the London Marathon, so that's kept him ticking over. But it's time for a big one, really. So, a few more to come.
Any in Europe, or?
I think we might go somewhere warm next time.
A couple more questions, I think. Yes.
Do you like to take books with you when you walk, and what types of books?
I'd love to. I always want to, but then I put the weight of it into my rucksack and I think, no, out. Moth always takes Beowulf with him. Always, still does. I still don't know why. To me, it's just a story of who's got the biggest sword, but I said he's yet to see. But I don't, I don't carry a book when we're walking. But I find that when I'm walking, I'm just so immersed in what we're doing, so absolutely in the moment, I think, of what we're doing. Even in the evening when we're in a tent, I don't really want to break it. I just want to absorb that moment. And then it's a huge pleasure to come back to and just pick a book up and just lose myself in a book again. It's a real joy when I get back.
Do you have any favourite in terms of, like, I guess, nature books? Any books that you love?
There's so many that I read. Just recently I get sent lots of books. People want me to, read their books, and that's great because, I have this huge stack of books that I read. And there's some absolutely wonderful ones. And then last year, I got the honour, I suppose, really, of being one of the judges for the Wainwright. So I had their lovely pile of nature books to read. At the moment, I've just been given one by the ex-soldier who walked the coast of the UK. I think it's called Finding Hildesay. Hildesay. So I'm just about to start reading that, so that's interesting. That's more of a travel book than a nature book. Nature writers, I skip around. I don't think I ever stick to one because I like to see how different people write in different ways about things and how they express what they think. So I love to just sort of hop and skip between them, really.
Someone else? Final question? Oh, there is no final question. Well, thank you. That's good because it leaves time for the signing. So all the books are half price by the power invested in me by whatever fund manager owns Waterstones.